Hello everyone, it's Patrick's here for Patrick's Points on our very last module. It's been a quick sprint through literacy difficulties this summer. Thanks for hanging in there, for giving it the old college try. All right, this is our woefully inadequate single week to deal with the issue of writing difficulties, and I will get there very quickly. However, a lot of you commented, as I did in the introduction last week, that 1 week on the issues related to teaching comprehension, especially to students who struggle with it, was also very inadequate, and we dumped a lot of information on you. Fortunately, the issues around reading comprehension do trickle over a little bit into the final 2 chapters we'll read in the Klingner-Vaughan book. So I'm going to start there very briefly. I want to point out I did not assign chapter 8 in the Klingner-Vaughan book. I think it's a very strong one. It deals with collaborative strategic reading, reciprocal teaching, some of the things we touched on in the fall. It just simply is a matter of trying to make things feasible for you all. Now, so I guess my encouragement is to go ahead and read chapter 8. I think you'll find things that you can use in the classroom there for sure. All right, now chapter 6 and 7 in Klingner and Vaughan deal with teaching comprehension to special populations. One are English learners. I'm glad that in several of our texts they have been a focus because they are a desperately needy population, and we need teachers who are more knowledgeable about them, and hopefully you feel like you're heading in that direction. The other population is students who have true learning disabilities that will affect their reading comprehension. Again, remember that there can always be different issues why students would struggle. Maybe it's environmental. Maybe it's just a sort of history of inadequate instruction. You know, when we get to chapter 7, we're looking at students who really do have some cognitive processing deficits that would make comprehension more difficult. Now, what you'll see really across those 2 chapters is that we need to look at both the quantity and the quality of our instruction. That is always going to be the formula in terms of trying to provide intervention that will accelerate students' learning. Okay, it's always a matter of quality, are we doing the right thing? And quantity, are we doing enough of it to really promote that accelerated learning that is what we need when it comes to students who are behind. Okay? This is the point I want to make here. The authors will give several points about sort of increasing intensity, increasing quantity. We can do it in smaller groups. We can do it for longer periods. We can do more sessions per week. All of those make a lot of sense, especially for me and my experience with issues around phonemic awareness, decoding, fluency. In those issues with our younger readers, for the most part, I think our quality can generally be fairly consistent and fairly high. And probably we're going to see the biggest breakthroughs when we increase the quantity, when we provide more intensive instruction. Now, I am not so sure that that is true when we get to reading comprehension. Here, my sense from both the research and being in classrooms quite a bit is that the quality side of this puzzle can be fairly iffy. This is, as we've said many times, the calculus or the algebra of reading instruction. This is the more complex stuff. We teachers are far less confident in how to teach it than they are some of the basics around phonics and word recognition. Consequently, you get more variation in quality, and I think we first have to tighten up our quality in terms of teaching comprehension before increasing quantity is really going to make a lot of difference. Who cares if we do a whole bunch of it if it's very weak instruction to begin with, right? So I want to make the following points about quantity, similar to some of the points the authors make and similar to what we saw last week in the video. First, if you're talking about kids with learning difficulties, we want to make this kind of rather abstract and strategic stuff as concrete as possible. Again, think about my example from last week, the who's the main who, what's the main what kind of approach to main idea. Now, we want to make it specific. Very generic kinds of things will mean nothing to kids who are going to struggle and who may have processing difficulties. So remember again, my example from the main idea lesson. Here's main idea for when you have to categorize your who's or categorize your what's. Here's main idea when your what may actually be a when. Very specific kinds of instruction that will help them transfer the skill that we're teaching to a lot of different cases. Next, that critical skill of modeling. A lot of you sort of addressed that in my quiz question about the inappropriate instruction last week. Next, that critical guided practice. Let's set up, because of the nature of the text that we provide and so forth, let's set up opportunities for kids to be successful, to take their first steps using and applying these strategies. Next, and this is what I want to emphasize today because I think it goes beyond sort of what I pointed out last week in the main idea lessons. This instruction needs to be strategic. What I always say about teaching comprehension strategies, and what I think a lot of times we miss on, is that we don't teach them as strategies. We don't teach kids not only what they are, but how to use them strategically. Here's what I mean by that. A lot of times you will hear in classrooms with young kids this idea of sort of making personal connections to the text. And in fact, the reason I'm embedding this today in my lesson, I wanted to focus on writing, is largely because of the lessons provided at the end of chapter 7 in the Klingner-Vaughn book. I'm not sure those are really effective lessons because they lack this strategic quality. You'll see, you'll hear teachers say, okay, who has got a connection? Who can make a connection to this text? And a kid will say, it's about a grandfather, and I just saw my grandfather last weekend. Okay, that is a connection, but is it a strategic connection? Does it actually help you as a reader further understand, further comprehend, further analyze the text that you're reading? So much of our instruction stops right here. Can you just do it? Can you make any kind of connection? Simple, distracting, whatever. Who's got a question they can ask about what we read? Is it a good question? Is it a strategic question? Or is it, what color is Sally's hair? A lot of times we just stop far too short and we produce sort of the right behavior, but in a non-strategic fashion that I can't really see helping these kids as readers, and in fact may actually be distracting. So here's what I mean by teaching comprehension in a strategic fashion. Let's take this same point of making connections. If we simply add another step, and I both model this step, I provide guided practice in this step. So now, here's my little chart. We're going to talk about making strategic connections, not just connections, but strategic connections. Those are connections we share with kids that really help me or help us as readers further get into, further understand the story we're reading. Maybe they cause us to make predictions about what characters are going to do, etc. So, for instance, I model for students, and this is a hypothetical case, but I'm reading about a son and a family, a dad, and I say, right here on page 17, this description of the dad, it reminds me of my dad, kind of gruff, kind of intimidating at times, big man, sort of, a little bit gruff in the way he speaks, a little bit short. How does this connection help me as a reader? This critical second column to this kind of chart. And then I demonstrate. This really helps me understand that Jed, how he's probably going to want to not disappoint his dad because, his dad is kind of this intimidating, gruff character, and he may sort of be a little fearful about displeasing him. So I'm going to watch carefully as I go forward about how this plays out and how that shapes Jed's behavior. Now, what is your strategic connection and how does it help you as a reader? And, we go on and maybe prompt students to provide some answers and then really emphasize and help them to start to articulate how their connections, not just that they're making them, but how it helps them think more deeply about the text. Okay, this is what I'm talking about in terms of quality comprehension instruction, especially this strategic dimension to it. I don't think providing more quantity, a very sort of superficial instruction around who has a connection, who has a question. Yeah, we could do that more. I'm not sure that that's going to pay off with better comprehension for our strugglers. First, we get the quality piece right, and especially we make it strategic. Then, yes, if we practice this in partners, practice this independently, now I'm feeling better about, what the benefit will be for the students.